Hello, I'm Anthony. Today we're going to take our first look at one of the new features of Cubase 14, the drum machine track. Over the course of this little mini-series, we're going to get to know the drum machine pretty well. Today I'm going to give you an overview of its various components, and we're also going to have an examination of the two different types of audio that commonly live in drum machine pads. Now what you're looking at the moment here is a drum machine track that I already created as part of my pattern editor video. I'll put a link to that above if you want to see the pattern editor. We're not going to talk about that in detail today, but just to get us back to the situation where this track actually exists, I think it's useful to go right back to the beginning and add a new track. As you can see, we have a new symbol in the add track dialog of type drum. You can create drum tracks of type pattern event or MIDI part, a relatively insignificant decision as it happens. Call your track whatever you want. And this is what the drum machine looks like with an empty drum track. We haven't yet loaded any sounds onto these pads, and so Cubase is asking us to do so. Now the easiest way to accomplish this is to load a track preset. This is going to populate 16 of the 128 available pads. In other words, we're going to entirely populate one pad group in one single hit. Let's click track preset name. And in this example, and I'll stick with it, I chose down tempo movement. Just single click on the name and it loads all of those pads up. And here they all are. Some of these pads have multiple sounds. If we have a listen to the snare, for instance, that snare sound is comprised of 3 different layers, and here they are. The snare sound itself, let's mute the other 2, and I can just press D1 on my keyboard. There's the snare sound. We have a transient and some noise. Add them all together. There's your composite snare sound. So every pad in the drum machine has 4 layers. They can contain individual sounds they add together to make a single sound. Now, not all drum machine sounds are made equal. In fact, they're split into 2 major categories. The first one is your simple sample. It lives somewhere on your computer, you import it, everyone's happy. The second type of sound isn't quite so easy to understand what's going on. Steinberg have internally curated a list of drum sounds and they've called them instruments. What you're looking at on screen at the moment, for example, is a snare instrument. The other 2 layers of this pad are sample sounds, and if I toggle between a sample sound and an instrument sound, you can see there's quite a dramatic change to the interface. All of these controls down below are all different for samples than they are for instruments. Now that we've gone through that very simple process of creating a track, I'm going to delete this one that I've just made, reselect my existing one. Let's just listen to a couple of bars of this rhythm to give us some context. This is what we've got so far. You can see the pads playing, everything's very straightforward so far. Let's dive into a little bit more detail about the difference between instruments and samples, because this is one of the things that's likely to most confuse you when you first start using the drum machine track. We're going to pick on this conga sound, and we'll have a look at the 2 different sounds. We have a conga instrument on layer 1 and a transient sample on layer 2. Let's start with the instrument first. Exactly what are we talking about here? Well, if you click on this instrument symbol, you get a list of all of the various options of different types of instruments that you can select. And this is what you saw when you first created your empty drum track. Cubase is kind of herding you towards using its internal sounds. Here's conga 2, which is the sound that's currently being used. I could override that with a cowbell if you want. We always need more cowbells. And the list of controls that are used to manipulate instruments are different than those for samples. They're actually different within instrument types as well. So if you have a look at the various controls that you've got down here, they're going to remain largely the same. We have oscillator, pitch, amp, envelope, etc. But if I now browse around different tabs looking for other instrument types, the categories stay largely the same. We've still got one called oscillator, here's a pitch, here's an amp envelope, but this time we have a click section which is only appropriate for kick instruments. Back on the conga, We don't have that, but we have a different set of options. So all of this is very tightly curated. And this is why you can't just drop any old thing into the instruments section, because Steinberg have carefully selected exactly what you can do with those instrument sounds. Hopefully and surely at some point in the future, they'll introduce expansion packs or some ability to add additional instruments in. You can't do that for now. What we've got is what we've been given. So it's a very tightly controlled list of sounds. In the case of the samples, however, when we jump over to layer 2, we're completely free to do whatever we want. We can load any audio wave into this layer, and the controls for editing samples are all universal. So these controls that you see down at the bottom, pre-filter, pitch, filter, and amplifier, they're going to be exactly the same for every audio file that you load into the drum machine. We'll examine all of these sections in later videos of this series, but what I do want to do today is have a look at the various different ways to replace instruments and samples on these pads, because it's pretty counterintuitive. It's not obvious at all how you're actually supposed to overwrite these sounds and interact with your system. Let's go back to the conga example and do some editing of this sound. The first thing that I'm going to do is replace the cowbell with the conga again. Let's choose conga 1 this time. And have a look at these controls down below. These are the curated list of controls for conga 1 of this particular track preset. So we have this idea of instrument presets, pre-configured combinations of controls that give you this sound. So let's get some different conga sounds into this pad. I'm going to right click on the pad itself and say find instruments. Now for the rest of this video, I'm going to need to move me out of the way because we're going to be talking about the media rack quite a bit. Let's have a look at what's happened when we selected that find instruments option. Up at the top, we have a filter that's been applied. We're only looking at plugin presets. It's also filtered by plugin name, so we're having a look at just the drum machine instrument presets. This list that we can see down here is all of the various different drum machine instrument presets. If I then type in this search bar at the top of the media rack, conga, I could have done it by attribute filter. Here are all of the different conga sounds that we can load onto this pad. And in fact, the downtempo movement preset, which is where we started, contains a few congas. Here they are. I'm going to choose a conga out of a different track preset. Let's select the Beat Starter 01. Now you're not going to hear anything. I don't know if this is a bug or something that I'm doing very dumb, but basically when you click on instrument presets, you don't auto hear them. There's a previewer down below, but it doesn't do anything. The only way that you're actually going to hear this preset is to enable hot swapping. I don't know why they've made this so complicated, but this is the way it is. We have these buttons in the top right hand corner of the drum machine that allow us to hot swap our preview sounds. So if we choose hot swap preview layer, it's going to enable that button, and now it's been activated. If I click on any one of these preset sounds, so you still can't hear it, but the pad has been updated live. So now if I get the pattern running in the background, each time I click on one of these presets with hot swap engaged, you're going to hear that pad in place. It hasn't yet overwritten the sound that's actually on the pad. This is just a preview that you're hearing. Let's say I'm happy with that one. Now I need to get that sound onto the pad. Again, this isn't intuitive. If I double click on this sound, nothing happens except we've just fallen out of preview mode. Can you see that the hot swap button is no longer engaged? Let's turn hot swapping back on and pretend we didn't do that double click, because that's not the way to do it. What you need to do is click this little tick symbol that says apply hot swap. And now this sound has just been loaded onto this pad. Can you see it says conga 3? I'll do it one more time. Choose conga 1, engage the hot swapping mode, and then apply that hot swap, and it overwrites the pad, and you can see conga 1. You don't have to go through hot swapping. You can click on a preset, drag it over onto the pad, and that will apply it directly. But obviously you don't know what you're going to get until you hear it. Let's have a look what we've got now. Turn hot swapping back on, preview some different sounds, apply the hot swap, and that's now been baked into the pad. A very strange and unnecessarily complicated way of getting one sound into another. I'm not sure why I'm not able to preview these sounds. I've tried all of these options. There's wait for project play and there's preview start and all sorts of different features. It doesn't seem to matter what combination of buttons I press. I never get to hear this preset in place. I've tried loading patterns into the preview player and basically just gave up. Something doesn't seem to be working on my system, but hot swapping does work. Let's be kind and call these version 1 issues. If it's still like this in 5 years' time, I'm going to have a problem. But as far as day 1 functionality is concerned, it's pretty clunky and you have to basically work your way around all of this stuff. Now let's try loading samples instead. So this time I'm going to choose Find Samples from the right click on the pad option. Let's see what this gives us. So this time again we have a curated filter. Up at the top, this time it's pre-selected audio files and chromatic percussion, drum and percussion on its own. So it's pre-selected 3 different main types of category and it's also selected the one-shot option. So here are all of the samples that match those criteria in my media bay. Now my sample tagging isn't the best. I have a directory on my system just called core samples and it contains thousands of samples that I haven't yet got around to tagging. So if I want to find all of the congas in my system to load a sample into this pad rather than an internal instrument type, an alternative option for me is to go up to these buttons in the top right hand corner of the drum machine again, and this time click Find Samples. This is closer to what I want. Up at the top we have the pre-selected filter audio types, but there are no actual attribute filters applied. So now if I go into the search bar at the top and type conga, I'm going to get all the congas in my system. This time when I click the samples, I do hear them immediately. The preview works in sample mode, but I still need to engage hot swapping if I want the sample to be temporarily populated into the pad. Once I've found the sample that I'm happy with, click confirm, apply hot swap, and now that sample's been written into the pad. So working with samples on the pads is ironically much easier than the internal instruments that Steinberg are trying to give you. It seems they got a little bit carried away in development and they simply haven't polished off the edges well enough yet. Not having full access to the preview mode in the media bay is a big deal and it makes it so clunky, I'm unlikely to use it until they sort that stuff out. I am, however, perfectly happy to use samples and can see this being my standard modus operandi for the time being. Now, while I was talking to you, somehow, at some point, this filter has reverted to all media types. I don't know when that happened and I have seen it happen before, so just keep an eye on this and make sure that you filter just audio files. I'm going to head back to the cymbal sound because this has 3 different layers in the pattern that we're listening to above. Each of these cymbal hits is using all 3 of these layers. Up to 4 are available, obviously. These 4 layers all mix together into these master output controls in the top right hand of the interface. In fact, as we click across all of the various options in our sample layers, these controls are the only ones that never change, so they're basically global to the entire pad. The controls in this bottom view are context sensitive. As I've said with samples, they're always exactly the same. None of the samples that we've looked at so far have a filter, but if you turn the filter on, that unit would be enabled as well. If you want to switch from a sample to an instrument, the only way to do it is to throw the sample away, and then it pops up your submenu for choosing an instrument. If, however, you have an instrument loaded and you want to jump over to a sample, you can do that from within the interface because the right-hand option is actually sample mode. If you choose that, you've got an empty sample player, and now it's up to you to choose which sample you want. I'm just going to reload my original down-tempo movement preset to get rid of all of those changes that I've made. Once you've mixed your 4 layer sounds together, and here are your master controls for adjusting each one of the layers' volumes, they all go into an internal insert FX bus. So every single pad has its own FX bus. And if we jump over to the Pad FX tab, you can see that you have basically 4 different insert effects to choose from. Once again, they are pre-selected. You can't change these fundamental effects types. Presumably in the future they'll give us more options, but we don't have them at the moment. As far as presets are concerned, however, each one of the 4 insert effects does have available presets. So here's the Bit Crusher. With Bit Crusher selected, let's turn it on. So here are the Bit Crusher controls, and then I'd be able to select one of the Bit Crusher presets. If, however, I have the equalizer selected and I open my preset viewer, these presets are equalizer presets. Then you're going to have the option to send your entire pad sound off to a couple of sends. So we have delay and reverb. These 2 effects are track wide. So if we pick on delay, for instance, if I choose the feedback control and then jump over to a different pad, doesn't matter what pad I select, all of the delay controls are universal, and each pad has the option to throw some or all of its signal over to the delay and reverb. And finally, after every pad has been through its internal FX bus and then its external sends, you're going to hear the cumulative output. We have a group tab that gives us an overview on a group by group basis, so you can independently alter its levels, its pan controls, its send values. So this is a nice overall view of that entire pad group. While I'm complaining a little bit about features that don't exist yet, we don't have the option to load pad groups. In an instrument such as Groove Agent, for instance, I could choose an empty group of 16 pads, right click on it and basically load a brand new pattern group into these 16 pads, and it could sit happily side by side with the existing 16 pad group. You can't do that yet. Hopefully, again, this is going to be stuff that gets introduced in the future. Manually configuring every one of these one by one is going to be a bit of a pain. I can't really see me doing that. So it's a mixed bag. There's a lot to like. I'm definitely going to be using the drum machine as part of my workflow, but there are elements of it that are just too clunky at the moment. I can't see me really diving. I'm not particularly heavily invested in the internal instrument sounds yet. The fact that they're so tightly constrained and you have a very limited list of things to choose from, I just don't know why I'm going to do that. I'm highly likely to just use samples from my own library because I've got complete control over them. They seem a lot more flexible to me. But anyway, that's the overview done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. If you want to see other episodes in this series, don't forget to subscribe. Hit like on this video, helps me out with the YouTube stuff. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.